All right, guys, we've got a great show for you today. We have special guest Britt Hartley with us from the Almost Awakened podcast. She's a co-host with Bill Reel, and she has a super popular TikTok channel called No Nonsense Spirituality with over 100,000 followers and growing. The channel hasn't even been up for a year yet. She's got like a load of credentials, which I can't even list them all. She's got so many. I know she's got a master's degree, a doctorate degree, and she's like also an ordained Sufi nihilism recovery coach, and on it goes.
Yeah, deconstruction coach. We just found this person, you a little earlier than me, and I'm blown away by the content. Like this is a remarkable lady, so I can't wait to get into this interview.
All right, so let's do it. All right, well, Brittany, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on. Where to start? The most basic thing. I found you on TikTok. Your No Nonsense Spirituality. You talk a lot about secular spirituality on there, and that might be kind of like a foreign concept for people out there. Maybe you could explain for our audience out there what exactly you mean by that.
Sure. So pleasure to be on the show. Nice to meet you guys. So I do secular spirituality. I'm an atheist spiritual director. I have a master's degree in theology, so I'm very familiar with religion and spirituality. And essentially my approach is, how can I get the most spiritual tools for myself and my people and my family and other people with as little hoops to jump through as possible as far as truth claims and beliefs and believing the unbelievable. And so how can I access the tools with as little kind of BS or dogma or all the things that are kind of around it for people, so that we stay in between fundamentalism, which has all kinds of dangers for yourself and society, and nihilism, which is also damaging for people. It's kind of this balance between order and chaos. So I want all the tools that spirituality provides, but I want it kind of with as little kind of nonsense as possible. And so that's kind of my shtick.
Like a more sophisticated way of navigating the progress through those stages, because in some sense I think that it's sort of healthy to enter into a nihilistic stage at some point when you've abandoned some of the more traumatic aspects of religion.
Yeah, I do think that if you have the right tools, nihilism can be the best place to kind of build your authentic, intentional, meaning and purpose driven life, because nihilism forces you to be really honest about what that looks like, because all of the things that you were holding on to or security blankets are all gone. And so it's a place of deep honesty. And so I do think I really enjoy working with people who are kind of in nihilism and crawling out of that place, because it can be the best place to kind of build that foundational life. But without tools, it can be a very terrifying place. People describe it as being in a black hole where it's like you can't find any footing. How do I make sense of right and wrong? How do I raise children? How do I even know if it's ethical to even bring children into this world? How do I function in a world that just has no meaning and purpose? How do I make sense of a universe that doesn't care that I'm here? When you really get into that space without tools, you can get a kind of existential depression. We've lost people in that space. It's a suicidal place too. Yeah. And so what I try to do is, what are the tools that can help you in that space? But I'm not going to make you believe something that in nihilism you just can't believe anymore, because you've deconstructed too much to believe in some kind of God or some kind of religion in order to get these tools. So how can we bypass that kind of belief step and get you those tools more directly so that you can kind of build out of nihilism?
Beautiful. One of the things that kind of like attracted me to your content was the compassion that I noticed instantaneously, the way that you were talking about people who might be in some of those fundamental religious states or traditional religious backgrounds and stuff like that. Because on TikTok, there's many like live streams and people debating, and like they always have the head title over them that says like, God's not real. And it's like, come on here and fight me. And yours was more like, let's talk about it. More like, and And I understand like why, you know, you believe many of the things. I understand where you're coming from, which kind of leads me, I guess, maybe into my next question, which is this journey. Like you, it's to the extent of which you are comfortable sharing with us. I would love to know, because I found you relatively like last week, like very soon. I found you like last week, and I was like, wow, this is fascinating. Maybe you could tell us and our audience like where you've come from. How did you get to this point?
Yeah. So I might not be as compassionate towards, people who believe different than me, or people with fundamental beliefs, if I was raised in a secular home and religion just didn't make sense to me. But I wasn't. I was raised as a Mormon, and I was an active Mormon, and I was a believing Mormon, and I was an apologetic Mormon at some point. And so that compassion to others really comes from a compassion, trying to have compassion for my previous self, because I never want to speak in such a way that my inner self is shamed by who I am now, because that doesn't feel very whole. That doesn't feel like it includes all of my story. And so my approach now, well, I'll go back to my story a little bit. So I was raised Mormon. I was kicked out of my home at the age of 16 for having sex. And it was pretty traumatic. And I had this really big thought at that age. I didn't really, you're 16 years old, so I didn't really understand how egotistical it was at the time. But I had this thought that if I could just figure out what was true, like what was capital T true, God, religion, the universe, whatever, I could build my life in such a way that I won't have these painful detours like the one that I was on. And so I really was a truth seeker. And so I started with Mormonism, that moved to like a nuanced Mormon, to like a mystic, to like open and relational and process theology. And I had all these stops along the way. But essentially, once I started deconstructing, it just didn't stop until I was in nihilism. And so the deepest hole for me of what that looks like, if I'm going to be open and honest and vulnerable here, the thought that really almost killed me was that if we don't have free will, and evolution is kind of this machine of violence where in order to live, you have to kill conscious life. There's something inherently violent about being alive. And if I have no free will, then the most ethical and moral thing to do is to withdraw myself from a system that I didn't consent into. And it was very hard to work around that thought. And I had young children, and I was very torn about all that. And I just had this sense of not wanting to consent to this life because there's no meaning, there's no purpose, and there's violence. And I didn't consent to this. And it felt a little bit like I was a robot. I was in a robot's body. This is where it got a little dissociative for me. But like I was in a robot's body, and the robot has to be violent. And if we were to kind of awake to being in that state, we would want to shut the robot down. And so these were deep philosophical places, deeply existential philosophical places. But because of my faith journey and going through theology school, that had completely shattered my belief in God, completely shattered my belief in any religion. And so people kept offering me, I understand you feel this way, but just believe in God, just have faith. I couldn't anymore. And so I was stuck without any tools there, because every kind of offering for help had beliefs attached to it that I couldn't believe. And so that tool I couldn't use. And so eventually I really made space. I really made sense of that space. And there's a lot of philosophy, Nietzsche, Camus, Dostoevsky. There's a lot of deeply philosophical shifts that really help you in that space. And I essentially rebuilt my life from the bottom up. So everything that religion used to give me in Mormonism, and there are good things. Like when you are a Mormon kid, that is a fantastic community to be raised in. You have identity and belonging and rituals and rites of passage, and you sing together and you serve together. And it's not that way for everyone. But for me, I missed all of that. And so I rebuilt every single aspect of spirituality that I used to have as a Mormon, but now outside of God and outside of religion, and found a beautiful, free, and intentional and love driven and purpose driven life on the other side of nihilism. So I have compassion for anyone on the religious spectrum between fundamentalism and nihilism, because I also personally made many stops along that line, and spent a lot of time all the way across the board. And so that compassion for me is self-compassion, that at all of those stages, I really was trying to do my best.
And then you return to that connection to others and stuff through that compassion, it seems like, too.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I don't want to ever, I don't think that shaming people into the conversation is just going to do anything for anyone. You know, that just, even if you were trying to convert everyone to atheism, even if that was your goal, I mean, going in and shaming people who have beliefs just seems like a really douchey way to go about that goal. That's not, it's that, and you get this sometimes with, people will argue with me whether there's a culture of atheism, because some people say, oh, atheism isn't a culture, it's just you don't believe in God and there's no culture around it. But atheism within the context of a very, you know, white Christian nationalistic nation does kind of create a culture. And sometimes that culture, especially in post-religious spaces, starts to act like a religion. This happens in Mormonism all the time, where ex-Mormons, when they're right out of Mormonism, they still act Mormon because they haven't deconstructed all the thought patterns that they were raised with. And ex-Mormonism can sometimes act like a religion. What the prophet is different. You know, Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens are the new prophets. This is the new narrative. Yeah. This is the new in-out group. We're a missionary for this cause. And it can start to act in all the ways that it used to in your brain as they were when they were Mormon. Yeah. And so I do want to get away from just creating new religions. I want to get to how can we get these tools so that people can rebuild their lives without just jumping from one religion to the next and not actually deconstructing it totally, so that you can live a much more free life.
And even like scientism can be, anything can be that. Anything can be turned into like a new belief. Like, oh, I'm not a ignorant Christian anymore. I'm enlightened. Like, so it's the same as saved, you know, or it can be. It can be.
There's a great book. In fact, I'll grab it right here. This book right here, Strange Rites, 7 New Religions for a Godless World. It's talking about how, yes, people are leaving organized religions, but our brains are essentially the same. Like, we still have the same needs for community, for story, for purpose, for community and all this stuff. And so this sociologist was tracking kind of where is it going. And it was very interesting to dig into how fandoms act like religions, or how the wellness culture can very much act like a religion. It even has like a repentance process. Like, if you're bad, then you do this detox to be clean. And it can get very, especially for post-Christians, the wellness culture can start acting like a religion. Keto CrossFit warriors can sometimes, like, that can be. And when I say religion, I'm using the term that is most common for kind of academics in my space is, how are you orienting yourself in the universe? What are the rituals and values and stories and community and rites of passage, and just how are you orienting yourself? And so in some ways, everybody under that definition would be religious. I'm just a fan of how can we do this intentionally with like as little bullshit as possible.
Yeah.
And how can we get those tools for you that are just, some people just call it spicy psychology, because the good stuff of spirituality is good mental health.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious about some of the tools maybe that you've extracted, because it seems like part of your thing is extracting traditional tools from these religions, some of the finding the golden nuggets that you can, and extracting. What are some of those things for a secular culture like ours that we're in today? Like, what are some of those tools?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, because when I start talking about the benefits of religion, I get a lot of pushback of saying like, well, religion is just bullshit, or it's power structures, or it's abusive. And yes, it can be all of those things. Like, I'm a Mormon woman. Like, I'm well aware of like the abuses of patriarchy and things like that. However, religion has been the vessel. It's just the vessel that has provided psychologically healthy things. So some of those things is, we have science now behind rituals that show that we process emotions faster when we do a ritual, even if you make it up. Even if you make it up. We have studies that show, there was a great study that had a room of people, and they told them someone's going to win $200. And they actually pick someone and give them $200. And, you know, the rest of the people are very disappointed. And one group did a ritual. They wrote out their feelings. They put salt on the paper. They crumpled it up and they threw it over the shoulder. So like something legitimately made up. And then the other group just kind of had to sit with their feelings and didn't do a ritual. And when you ask them later on, hey, are you still disappointed that you didn't win the money? The people who did the ritual, they were over it. It was done. They weren't thinking about it anymore. The people who didn't do the ritual, they were still feeling disappointed. Rituals scientifically help us to process things out of our body or mark values. There's a lot of things that rituals do. And so what I do is, okay, what is the science of what is actually happening here? And how can we access that tool without having to go into a church to say, give me your ritual and do it that way? Because then you're going to have to believe a lot of things to access those rituals.
Yeah.
So one would be, the rituals in your life. Another would be awe and transcendence, which is that we can scientifically study states of awe and transcendence, those nights when you're looking out at the stars, that feeling. And it's good for your brain. It's less neurotic. We can see in your brain, this is a good thing to experience this in your life continually. Now, the problem is, like, if you're an atheist, every atheist will say that they really enjoy the feeling of looking out at the night sky when you don't have a lot of light pollution and just contemplating just the beauty of being alive right now. Ask any atheist and they do that. But is there a day on the calendar where atheists gather to do that? No, right? And so that's the problem again, is that religion and the myths of religion were the vessels. They were always the vessels of providing these things. And so now if you want to get those tools and you're not resonating with, a particular God, then how can we build these things into your life? Rituals, awe and transcendence, contemplation, community, moral education, all of these things that religions used to do. How can we build all of those tools in your life in a really science-driven way, which is especially important for people who are deconstructing from religion, because they have such a high BS meter. And unless they feel safe, like, they're not going to play, like myself included, like if you have religious trauma. So it's a really science-driven approach of what is the actual science behind some of these tools that have been on the vessel of religion, and how can we get it now without the religion, which I think we can do now, which we might not have been able to do 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, whatever your local town church was, it was probably best for you to associate with that church. That's the only place you're getting art and music and story and contemplation and awe and ritual. That's it. That was your option. It was probably best for you to be whatever the religion of the day was. But today we have a little bit more freedom to be intentional and essentially create that life from the ground up in a way that's authentic to you. And I think that that's a really beautiful path for people to take, where you get the best of both worlds. You get all the benefits of kind of that science-driven perspective, so that you don't have to be so dependent on the supernatural and superstition, but you get all the tools that the religious people have that are good for, your psychological, mental, emotional, spiritual health.
Yeah. What you just said there reminded me of two things. One, the video on your channel of the guys talking about people who really like going to concerts, like secular concerts, getting the same sort of thing as like a worship service. And then two, I think we've both talked about this as, starting off as fundamentalist Christians and going beyond that. Now going back and attending a church service, a worship service, it's like I feel like I could get more out of that now. Back then it was colored differently. There's all this guilt and suppression and everything going on. And now when you look at it, this is a group of people coming together, saying nice words in unity and stuff. And just what like a fundamentalist Christian might think about that. Like that's blasphemous. You can't go to worship with me and not believe the exact same hardcore way I do.
Yeah. I get that personally whenever I visit, because whenever I travel, I visit kind of the local churches and temple, even now as an atheist, because like you say, this is some of the places that are most sacred to people, where you can really connect to human nature and understand human nature more. But whenever I attend a church where it's a different language, where it takes the language out of it and all the kind of faith stuff that my brain would be like, freaking out about. And I actually just watch and see people greet each other and touch each other and sing with each other and ask how their children, if their child's better and all of that stuff. When I can just sit and watch that, it's really beautiful. But for me,
you get that awe thing you were talking about. We were discussing this before with some Hindu art. And that there's symbolism in there. And I was like, I don't always want to know. I want to be respectful to all those churches and those services and the people in the way they believe. But that awe that I get sometimes comes from not having the whole picture of like, I don't even want to know what the symbolism is this.
Yeah,
I want it
for me, it's like, I don't even want to know what stuff you're talking about over the pulpit because you're going to freaking ruin it for me if I knew what you're talking about. So for me, it's like, I need to hear this in another language so that I can appreciate it. Otherwise, kind of my logic brain can just kind of trip me up a little bit, and that can be hard to do. But yeah, as an atheist, I still travel to and do many things that people would consider religious, and visit these sacred places, and visit the Sistine Chapel. Just had an incredible experience with people from all around the world, looking at the ceiling and these people who are trying to make sense of you have this moment when you're walking through it's incredible. You're walking through the Sistine Chapel, and at the end of the Sistine Chapel, you have this Judgment Day picture, and you have this picture of Jesus, and with one hand he's pointing up and people are going up, and with one hand he's pointing to his scar and pushing down, and there's people moving up and down. And it's essentially this come to Jesus moment where you are weighing your own soul of like, if this were to happen, am I one of the good guys? Am I doing my best or whatever? And you can see all the different human emotions, and it's incredibly powerful. Now, do I believe that moment is going to be literally happen? No, I don't. Yeah. But it's an incredibly powerful thing to kind of walk through that with other humans, see the stories and see the paintings and see the sculptures of how we first tried to make sense of life, and how we have this moral compass, and where does it come from. And it's so incredibly beautiful and even profound. And I still have mentors that are in different religions that I talk to and who mentor me for my own spiritual direction. So I can walk into these spaces now without saying, well, this is all bullshit. Like, no, there's something happening there that's very interesting. But can I get that? Can I try to access that without having to force myself to believe things that I just don't believe?
And it's a good glimpse of the dimension of time. Like, look at what humans can do given time. They can build this ridiculous, psychedelic, transcendent, amazing art and beauty. And that's all I'll say about that. I guess.
Well, you talk about it kind of like, I see it as like an evolutionary process, how we get to the point where we have people like you, which I think is great. And it makes me think of like other places in the world, like other countries where they don't have the freedoms to even like get to a place where they have a conversation like this. Is there like a responsibility for us to help, or do we just naturally stand back, like sit back, appreciate it for what it is, and they will eventually get to this point when they get there?
Yeah, it depends on the religion for me a little bit. So for me, I really try to be tough on bad ideas, tough on bad systems, and soft on people. And how I do that. So for example, let's take Islam. So me as an atheist, I have huge concerns with Islam. I have concerns about what it does for women. I have concerns about the LGBTQ community. I have concerns about certain language around jihad and violence and coercion. I have concerns. It's a concerning religion, and
it's amazing to me that you picked Islam, considering because it says on your resume that you're ordained Sufi. Isn't that like a Muslim mystic?
Yes. So I was going there. So I'm very tough on bad ideas in the world that cause harm and abuse. Right. Yeah. I'm gonna be. I'll keep making TikToks about all the kinds of abuses of religion because I think some of these are bad, not bad people, that some of these things are bad ideas that we just have to confront. If you're going to bring this belief into the public square, if you're going to bring these ideas into the public square, not just leave them at home, if you're going to bring these ideas into the public square, they're going to have to be challenged because it's just too dangerous. Fundamentalism is just too dangerous and poses an existential risk to humanity. Like, we're just going to have to be tough on it. But like you said, I am an ordained Sufi. I have a Sufi mentor, and Sufism is the mystical branch of Islam. And I hang out with Christian mystics and Sufi mystics and mushroom mystics and atheist mystics. They all speak the same language, which is they don't care what you call God. They don't care about the truth claims. They don't care which religion is true. None of that. Mystics don't do any of that. What makes mysticism interesting is that they focus just on the experience of what people have called God.
Yeah.
Now, I might use the term collective consciousness or awe or states of transcendence or states of consciousness. You know, I may have more secular scientific language that just makes me feel more comfortable. But what mystics do is they focus on the experience and diving into the actual experience of these states of what people have called God. Yeah. And so as far as, you know, what we do with other religions, I think we always kind of support the moderate voices in those religions, the people who are inside those religions trying to say, hey, let's stay away from this, like the Richard Rohrs of Christianity that are trying to say, hey, I don't think that, you know, maybe Trump is the best image of Christianity or whatever he's saying. Like, supporting those moderate voices within the religion that bring out the mysticism and the beauty, because there's a beautiful mystic branch for Buddha, for Jesus, for any of these people that is really profound and really life-changing. But
it's rare that I find, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but it's just so much I want to say, but it's rare that I find Christians that behave as if they really consider Jesus their example. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be mean to anybody, but it's like, that's a big deal to behave like Jesus, like some kind of person that legitimately wants what's better for you than for themselves. And
I told TikTok last week, just before you go on to your next point, I get thousands of comments from Christians, most of it judgmental and condescending, some of it even violent and really disturbing. And I went on TikTok last week because I got one message from someone where I had to sit back and say, this was written by someone who actually wants to follow Jesus. And all they did was like, I mourn with, like, Jesus mourned with those that mourn. He sat with the marginalized. He was concerned about institutional power and what it did to people. And so when I got that one message of someone saying, I'm really sorry that the church hurt you. I'm really sorry on behalf of Christians, you know, kind of like what you're seeing on this. And I see what you're doing, trying to get spirituality to people who have been hurt. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. Like, just the essence of a Christ-like message. And of the thousands that I've gotten, only one I can say, this is someone who acted like Jesus. So in all of the religions, it's how can I support that guy? How can I support the guy from inside the walls who is doing the work of saying, this is good, Jesus. Like, let's focus on this Sermon on the Mount stuff. Yeah. And this over here seems to be institutional, political, bureaucracy, condescending bullshit. Like, that's what Jesus was fighting against, and we need to keep fighting that fight. So there's voices, there are people inside of every religion, Mormonism, Islam, Christianity, any religion, any path, who are doing the work of supporting what's beautiful about that religion and trying to show that this stuff over here is not good. We need to stay away from it. And so I think, as far as how do we, going back to your original question, how do we help the world with this process? It's how can we support either you being that voice in whatever circumstance you're in, whether you're in or out of religion, and then how can we better support those voices in the world?
Yes, well said. And I watched that video that you talked about, that you found the one Christian that talk like a Christian. And by the way, I don't want to criticize like Christianity at large or say that like, or act like it's like ridiculous that people don't act more like Jesus. Jesus was an exceptional human. In a lot of ways, people are like, when they congregate and they get together and they've got jobs to go to and we live in a capitalistic society, on and on, it's like no wonder people are the way they are. But it's interesting when Jesus says like, don't build your treasures on earth and all this stuff. And I've said that to groups of people that are like believing and been scoffed at by like loving, you know, Christians, like laughing at me.
Isn't that so interesting though, that like when Christians play the persecution card, it was supposed to be for being that guy. Like if you are the guy in the church saying, hey, I'm seeing some stuff over here that would be like what Jesus would fight against, you're going to get some pushback from your own congregation. And that's what tells that you are actually being a prophet, because prophets in biblical history, desert fathers and mothers, they were kind of always on the outskirts of society, like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and they were speaking truth to power. And you get pushback from your own community for doing that. Jesus, any of the prophets, right? And so when Christians say I'm being persecuted and that means I'm on the right path, no. That persecution only really counts as being on the right path if you're getting it from your own community. If you're getting it from outside, it's probably just because you're being an asshole.
Remember that verse that said a prophet will never be accepted in his hometown or something like that?
It was supposed to be within Christianity. If you're being persecuted within Christianity, I want to hear your story. Tell me about you. I'm super interested. If you're on TikTok attacking people and then saying, oh, when people attack me, I'm being persecuted, and so I must be on the right path. No. Like, you must understand where the persecution was supposed to be coming from. Yeah. It was supposed to be coming from within your institution.
It's challenging to be alienated in that way. It's, you know, it goes against what you really want to do, which is, you know, connect with people and everything. And I had something else to say, but I forgot.
I think it's just part of the bigger issue is fear. I can think, like thinking back to my own personal experience, fear is a big component to people getting to the point where you got to, or maybe we got to. Like you probably, you know, left fundamentalism before I did, and then I saw your ability to do it, and that gave me courage to do that. And it took me probably after like maybe 6 years, no, not that long, probably after about 3 years after like leaving fundamentalism, to say with my own mouth, I'm not a Christian.
I had people.
I was so troubled. Even though I wasn't, I couldn't say it with my own mouth.
People would say, "Draw a line in the sand. You need to tell me right now. Like, confess Jesus." Like, YouTube is not the same thing as real life, as I'm sure you know. Like, I want to ask you, like, are you ever like, who's watching that? Like, how are people supporting this? Because so often in real life, I encountered people that were like, "Here's the line. Pick a side. Do you confess Jesus or not?" Like, crazy dramatic interactions, you know, in real life, some of which people since that time, because I don't know, because of steadfastness on my part, later on would walk away from that kind of conviction. And that's kind of a beautiful thing to see too, is see people coming out of it. Ugly to some people, beautiful to me, because I see that it's a progress, right? But
yeah. All right, there's like 5 things in there, like interesting threads. I'll try to grab a couple of them, but definitely fear plays a big part in this. And so one of my approaches is to not kind of go head on with someone's beliefs, even when I'm a spiritual director now, so I see clients to do this work, and I never kind of go into, let's do some Bible bashing to figure out like if your beliefs are, you know, sustainable or something like that, because I find that beliefs are simply there often to help us deal with our fears. And so a more direct route is, before I go into someone's beliefs and someone's belief systems, I really want to dig into, what are your fears? Because until we deal with your fears, you don't have a choice. If you are terrified to die and do not want to face it, you essentially don't have a choice to break away from the religion that gives you hope that you're going to see grandma again. You're psychologically, you're not able to make that move, because there's a subconscious fear that is so strong that is driving your behavior that you don't even know. And so when I try to logic you out of your beliefs because they're illogical, and sometimes I really do have the capacity to like walk you through a string of logic and or show historicity, and it won't matter. It won't matter.
Yeah.
At the end of that 8-hour discussion about something, they'll still want to believe because it doesn't matter, because subconscious fears are kind of dictating all of that. And so a really big part of what I do in my work is, what are the 4 existential human fears? And that is fear of death, fear of meaninglessness, fear of isolation, and fear of freedom. That last one, fear of freedom, is that we have a psychological fear of creating our own life, which is why some people believe that if gurus and leaders were just kind of wiped off the planet tomorrow, that we'd be free. And the reality is we'd recreate them tomorrow, because it's so hard to be a human that when some competent looking human says, here's my 12-step path to perfection, we say, here's my moral compass and my money and all my choices. Thank God I don't have to think about this anymore, because it's so hard. Like, it's hard. Like, life is gray and really hard. So once I dig into the fears and we actually kind of like build some tools to meet the fears, then we can dig into your beliefs, because only then can you have an honest conversation about your beliefs. If you try to do it before you meet your fears, then you're always just going to be subconsciously driven by it. And I also think it's unethical to strip someone's security blanket away and not give them better tools. I think
create a new trauma.
I love that. Like, I heard you say that many times. Like, don't like, and this is what I think a lot of these people on TikTok are doing in these lives, is that they're like hammering people over the head with a sledgehammer, and it's just to puff themselves up and see what I did. You know, look at them, they're all crushed. But it never even ends up like that. They end up just yelling at each other and then leaving. Like, it's ridiculous.
And it can be a fun game as an atheist to be like the intellectual sledgehammer and just kind of beat people over the head with it. And that can be an ego trip, just like when you were religious and being a missionary. It can be just as big of an ego trip, but it's empty. Like, if you stay there, it's going to be empty, because you're missing something.
It's the same as every other game out there, which is just meant to puff up the ego.
Absolutely.
I haven't. Oh, sorry. Continue.
So just last thing. So so facing fears, is something, when I look back at my story, I think one of the reasons that my deconstruction wasn't like 2 days, like it was like a 10-year walk out, right? And a lot of that is, and for Christians, it can be a fear of hell. For Mormons, that deep fear is that if I take one more step, I'm going to lose my family eternally. Like, that is drilled into us since we were children. At 5 years old, we are told, if you get off this path, you are going to be alone and your family's going to be without you forever. Like, and that was a deep, like, I felt it in my body. There was a deep male voice in my body that I had to kind of process out of my body in order to move forward. And so definitely fear plays a big part in deconstruction. And so what we can do there, instead of making, and it's part of my meaning and purpose today, is to help people where I got stuck, is if we can make that a little bit more smooth and give you tools for those fears and name those fears and work with those fears, then you can actually make that deconstruction process not so long and painful, because you have tool, instead of just kind of like, you're breaking your house down and now you're just kind of naked to the elements. We can kind of rebuild as we're breaking down so that it's not so jarring.
This is almost like a new societal rite of passage that's emerging, or something like that. Like, the scaffolding is all this stuff that got us to the show. We're here now, and I feel like we're kind of ready to move on to these deeper things that you're talking about. And it's awesome that people like you are emerging. It's going to be super helpful.
It's one of those things, though, like, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for nihilism, because I had no idea that atheist spiritual director was a thing. Like, who even heard of that? Like, what? Like, that's such a contradictory, like, title just in and of itself that confuses a lot of people. But the thing about nihilism, when you have to deal with, like, what actually do I care about? Like, what is a life that is fundamentally worth living just for the experience of it, not because of any grand, narrative?
Has to be answered.
And for me, it was like, I still love this religion theology world, but I don't believe it. But I think that there's things that are really good and really interesting and really helpful for me and my family and for others. And this kind of existential looming nihilism that we have in society. And I'm really interested in it, but I can't, I had to pull out of theology school. I was in my doctorate. I got to all but dissertation. I don't feel like I have a dissertation to write in theology. And so I pulled out, and it was a jump into, I don't know if a single person will understand what the hell I'm talking about. I don't know if a single person will understand what it means to be a spiritual atheist. But if I don't do this, if I don't speak kind of that message that is intuitive to me, life's not going to be worth living, because this is the project that I care about. And so again, this is how nihilism can really become your superpower.
Yeah.
Because if you really accept that, the person on TikTok who is making stitches on my videos telling me what an idiot I am, if I really, really accept that in 50 years he's going to be worm food and so am I'm just going to keep talking. Like it becomes a superpower, because
It's
you
freeing.
get so focused on what is fundamentally worth living. What are the projects? This is like the myth of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. What project is so interesting to me? What conversations like the one that we're having are so enjoyable that even though I'm going to die, I still want to have this conversation.
Heck yeah.
Because it's so enjoyable to me. And so that's how nihilism can become a superpower. It's because it really focuses you on kind of the projects that are fundamentally worth experiencing just for the experience of it. And so for me, that's kind of this atheist, secular spirituality space. And at the time, I didn't know that a single other person would resonate with what I'm talking about. And of course, once you start talking, though, you connect to so many other people doing all kinds of projects that I never would have imagined.
Thank God for the internet.
But I didn't know that when I was in theology school. I was like, well, I'm just going to do this thing over here, and I don't think anyone will listen, but I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah. And so it was almost a surprise to find so many other people out here too.
And you're conscientious about it. Like you point to past wise teachers that kind of hinted that this is where we were headed, that nihilism was going to become a thing. And interestingly enough, before we started this, I was saying, I in some sense, I think that like nihilism is like a necessary point to get to in the individual's life too. Like just so you can, because you got to face it. And you mention it being a kind of like requiring bravery to face nihilism so that you can get past it and, shed some of those confining, restricting, ideologically possessing ideas.
It's like a next evolutionary step.
But it's scary, and you got to do it with carefulness, which is where you come in, which is this procedural approach to it, so that it's not just like you're left in the wilderness, nihilistic, waiting for enlightenment.
Yeah, because the fear, especially from other philosophers, was that once we first face nihilism, not just individually, but as a society, that void is going to create some problems at first. And so the hypothesis from multiple different philosophers, including Nietzsche, was that once God is dead and we recognize that we're just kind of spinning on this planet and we're just like daisies, we pop up and then we experience things and then we die and we're made into something else. Once we deeply accept that it'll create a void, and the gods that live in that void are going to be really scary. And so one of those gods is political gods, which we see arise in demagogues like Trump, because we're clinging on to something. We're trying to cling on to something that's sturdy, right? And so someone who shows confidence can be really alluring when we're in this void space. Another fear was that once there's a death of God, that the God of capitalism will fill that void. And we see both in America. We see political religions and we see capitalism as kind of the new God. And both are empty. Both are killing people. Both are soulless. I would rather be... I've told people before that if I had to choose between being in a religion or having my kids have a political God or capitalism God, I would rather be in religion. At least in religion, you're going to get some Sermon on the Mount kind of stuff sometimes. But these other religions that are filling this void sometimes don't have the soul and depth and opportunities for mystic paths that religions have had. And so they're scary. But like what you're saying, I think it's something that we're just going to have to go through. It's going to be some growing pains before we build the tools in society that help with nihilism and depression and anxiety and all these things. And it's happening, and I'm seeing hints of that, but we are very early in that process.
We're
very
burning
early.
on all thrusters. Like we're burning out this carnal karma, like late stage capitalism. In some sense, it's like, just get to the point in your life where you're completely hedonic and find that there's zero meaning in the saltiest, sweetest politicians that can capture your attention, shed all that, and then just get to a fascination with just straight up truth. What's actually logical and true and real, rather than this
it can be painful, right? Because it seems sometimes like the process is slow, and we're asked to be patient, and but to kind of just make a little bit of a shift in the conversation, I'm fascinated with the mysticism part of what you're doing, because in mysticism, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're all experiencing at all times states of consciousness, and in mysticism is kind of like understanding the experience of reality through examining those altered states of consciousness. And on our channel, we've had conversations with people all over the place from many different belief systems and stuff like that. People talking about awakening, and like there's New Age ideology and religion and stuff like that. Is there any, because we've had this conversation in lieu of our conversation with you about magical thinking. Is there any place for magical thinking at all?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So for me, where I lean on this question is I want, there's definitely space for mystery. So when we talk about psychedelics, when we talk about awe and transcendent states, when we talk about deep interconnectivity, there is a lot there that is fundamentally still mysterious. Consciousness itself, fascinatingly mysterious. It's one of my great shames that I will probably die before we have any understanding of what consciousness is. If it's an emergent property, if it's something that's inherent to the universe, all these conversations are fascinating. So consciousness, how we're interconnected. I do psychedelic guiding also, and so there are times when I'm guiding where I will do something. I take a low dose when I'm guiding, where I will do something intuitively and not know why, and it's really kind of the right thing to do. And there's quantum entanglements, and there's pattern stuff, and there's intuition, and there's dream things. So I'm not opposed to mystery. Like, I'm not opposed to saying synchronicity. Jung spent his life trying to understand synchronicity. At the end of his life, he still couldn't make sense of it. He still had a sense that there were moments that were so synchronized that he couldn't explain it, that left open kind of mystery for him, but he never explained it till the day that he died. And I'm okay with all of that mystery. I'm okay with saying that that is mysterious. I'm the first one to admit when, like, that's mysterious, I don't know what's going on there, or I don't understand that yet, whatever. I think the move that we shouldn't make in light of mystery is saying, because this is mysterious, I can now fit my 1st century or 7th century God into that mystery, right? Because there's no reason to do that. There's no reason to say, when we're having these deep conversations about the nature of reality and consciousness and quantum entanglement and psychedelics, it fundamentally mysterious places. I see no reason for us to say, let's see what a 1st century Palestinian sheep herder has to say about this concept. Like, let's rope that in. I don't. But
I'm addicted to my iPhone. What is it? What am I supposed to?
Right. Yeah. So I tend to just use. I'm okay with mystery. I'm okay with not knowing. I'm okay. I've made peace with the unknown. I've made peace that there's most of the questions that I want answers to are not going to be answered in my lifetime. I still want to pursue those answers because it's my favorite game and I enjoy it.
Same here. That's what what we're about with the way. That's what,
all our conversations about the mysterious till the day that I die. Not that I'm getting anywhere with them, but because the conversation is so interesting and the process is so fun for me that it's my favorite game. Like, let's play my favorite game. I'm okay with that. I resist doing the magical jump because I think when we look at history, whenever there's been something that's mysterious, you have to imagine like you have to imagine living thousands of years ago and really not knowing why the sun comes up, really not knowing about germs, really not knowing why you had a tsunami in your village that just kind of wiped you guys out. And what we did in that space is, instead of saying that's fundamentally mysterious, we are superstitious by nature. And so we would drop virgins in volcanoes to try to appease the god that was mad at us. And we would create gods, and we would try to predict what the gods felt about us or what they wanted sacrificed so that we could appease them. And we did all kinds of magical thinking. And when we look back, we say, we were wrong. Like, we were
Or
wrong.
we would like burn the one guy being like, the reason we had a tsunami is because there was an earthquake. They'd be like, get him.
Right.
He's making too much sense.
And if you're a woman, like, you're already dead. Like,
Yeah.
you've been burned long before you even could say anything like that. So yeah, so I was, when people say, why are you an atheist and not agnostic? It's not because I understand the reality of the universe and I know that there's not a God. That's not what makes me an atheist. What makes me an atheist is that by trade, before I got into the work that I'm doing now, I was a history teacher. And when I look at literally at least 100,000 years of history where we are trying to use our magical thinking to make sense of the world, we are always wrong. And it usually leads us into God telling us that the other tribe needs to die. You know, that,
Yeah.
or, you know, if you're in, or the cults where, you know, you need to give me your wives because God said so, including the religion that I come from. So I'm very hesitant that in that place of mystery, let's make a jump into the supernatural. Let's make a jump into the magical, because when I look at our track record of doing that, we are not batting good enough to even be confident in making those kinds of jumps. I think we just say we don't know and sit with some uncertainty and say that's mysterious until we know more. Now, could that show eventually that consciousness is, you know, an inherent property of the universe and that we're part of some kind of collective consciousness? Like, sure, there's all kinds of interesting discussions about pantheism and panentheism and I forgot the one, panpsychism. All of those are interesting. I'll talk about those all day, but I just don't think that we are good enough in our track record to jump into magical supernatural thinking, because every time we've done that in the past, every single time, even if you're a believing member, you'll look back even at your own church's history and say, well, we were wrong about that. You know, these people weren't cursed by demons. They probably just had schizophrenia. You know what I mean? Like, we make that move all the time. So I think we just stop playing that game. I just don't think we're good enough at it.
I couldn't agree more with everything that you said there. And when you keep it at that level, you keep it playful and you keep it fun and engaging and not, you know, like, the imagination's a pretty strong thing. Creativity and imagination, even if you were going to apply it to what you were saying about rituals, you know, like you're like, I feel like if I spin reverse 3 times and let go of this thing that was bothering me, you know, you can, you don't have to turn it into a whole belief, you know, if you hold it lightly.
That's a huge game changer, especially if you're in nihilism, is because some people will feel like, I'm just in a video game and I get up and I put on my character and I play my little stupid human games and we have stupid conversations and I have to go to work, and it can feel like you're kind of detached in this video game that you don't want to play in. That is ultimately meaningless and going to be unplugged. And that can be how it feels in nihilism. People will often even explain that that's how they feel. They feel like they're in the video game, or they feel like they're in the Matrix. They feel like they're in the Truman Show,
on a track,
and you just want to blow your brains out because it's just so absurd. And the shift, like you were talking about, is changing the nature of the game so that it's fun playing. And so that was a huge shift for me, is that I'm not just seeking truth. I used to seek truth because that's what I had to do for my identity to survive kind of the trauma of getting kicked out of my home. That was a trauma response. But now I do it because it's my favorite game. It's the levels of the video game that I want to play just because it's enjoyable. In the same way that we play video games now, not because it has ultimate meaning, but because we just enjoy that level. We enjoy that game. And so when you change your life to be the video game that you want to play and the levels that you want to play, that's when it shifts from, I'm just putting on this character and playing this game that I hate, to I'm really enjoying this game. Like this conversation that we're having, this is one of my favorite levels. I'll do this till the day I die.
Same here, and it's what keeps us coming back and doing this show, and we love it. And it's amazing what can happen when you do that. It can be ugly in the beginning when you're walking away from that stuff with them, which I'm sure you go through. But on the other side of it, it's worth it.
It makes me want to. I have a question to kind of springboard off of what you were saying there. Imagine like you were someone who maybe came from a more traditional spot like we were in the past, and they stumble across a video like this and they watch this conversation and they've been poked. What would you say to that person who was watching this right now? What would they're like, what do I do? I'm literally trapped. Maybe they live in a small town and everyone in their family is, and they got these feelings and they don't feel the same. What do they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I were to talk, I'm kind of imagining like my previous self at this time. What would I do with this conversation? And so a lot of people will tell me, sometimes I'll have long form conversations with Christians. And when I get down to the end of it, we're kind of playing chess. I'm taking some pieces off the board that I can just prove that are wrong or whatever. And at the end of the day, they'll say, well, if I die and I'm wrong, I lose nothing. This is a very common argument that I get from people. Yep. I lose nothing. And if you're wrong, you go to hell. So I'm going to stay where I am at, because if I'm wrong, I lived a good life and I love this community and I love the things that we're doing, and I was wrong, but I lose nothing. But if you're wrong, you're going to a very bad place, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think when you meet that, when someone is in that place, I think what you have to argue is that I'm not suggesting you throw away spirituality and relationships and community and contemplation and all the good things about where they are. I'm talking about that there's nothing on the secular spiritual side that takes away any of that. It's that how can we improve that so that it's accessible to more people? So, for example, children are leaving organized religion. They're just not going to stand by while their gay friends are being marginalized. They're just not going to do it. And so I think I would argue that it's the other way around, that if you're wrong, if you're deep into your religion and you're wrong, you're going to spend your whole life talking and singing and working towards the next life. And that is real energy, like that is real life force that you're putting on to the next life. And so I don't see it being, well, if I'm wrong, I lose nothing. And if you're wrong, you're going to hell. I see it as a tragedy that you never even got to have a choice unless you face these things, unless you look squarely at your belief system and your fears and all of that. Because it's really the other way around. How sad would it be if you had one life and you wasted it focusing on the next? That to me is the real tragedy. I'm not afraid of hell. If God is compassionate and I tried my best to live a moral life, even with no thought of reward, if a God is merciful, God's going to be fine. Like God should be fine with that, because I tried to live a life of moral character anyway. And if God isn't, like if right faith matters more than character, then God is evil, because that's unethical. And that's a lottery, and that's stupid, and I'll go to hell like out of spite. Like, thank you. No thanks.
It's like the warrior's approach, and I know ex-Christians that have that same thing. I want to go to hell because then at least I'll be occupied trying to figure out how to get out. That is approach. But you had something on your channel too that was pretty good, and it was start telling the truth. I believe it was your channel, and it was a quote about, you start telling the truth and you'll end up where you really want to be. If you're living in lies, you're going to be stuck. So for that question about what do you do about the person that's like, I'm trapped, just start telling the truth of your thing, and it'll like push you out like a sliver into the life that you want to get to in some sense.
Telling the truth is the way to get from where you are to where you want to go, and that's what creates a path for you. And so telling the truth is a big part of that, and it's terrifying. I can remember just sharing vulnerably because it looks like I have it all kind of figured out over here, but when I was in it, I had to tell my husband that I didn't believe in Mormonism anymore, and I had not been wearing my garments, my Mormon garments, for a few months. And it was so terrifying in that moment of wanting to go back to where my marriage used to be, that I remember putting my garments back on because I just fundamentally wanted to go back to where it felt safe, because it was so terrifying. I thought I was going to lose everything. I thought I was going to lose my marriage. I thought I was going to lose my family. I had lost my career. I couldn't teach seminary anymore. I wasn't allowed to speak at church anymore. There was a moment when I truly had lost everything. And so when people are looking at this and they're saying, well, I don't want to go down that path because I don't want to lose everything either. Any person who has gone through this journey and made it to the other side will say that on the other side of that fence of losing everything is where you really gain it all back. So now I'm in a career that I love, that is authentic to me, which I didn't have before when I was in my doctorate program. Now I have deep, deep, intimate relationships where I don't have to pretend to be Mormon woman in order to have really intimate relationships. My marriage deepened and was able to survive, and I have kind of space to be who I am in my own marriage. I took my kids out of church. They're adopted. They're brown. I didn't want them ever reading kind of some of the racist stuff in Mormonism, so I do church at home with my kids, and we do it every Sunday. We did it this morning. And so once you rebuild these things from a place of true authenticity and intention, the life on the other side of losing everything is a life worth being alive for. Like, it's a life worth living.
It gets deeper.
It gets so much better. Like, yes, I lost a lot in that moment, but the relationships that I have now are so much better. The career I have now, so much better. The inner peace that I have, because I'm not dealing with cognitive dissonance or my fears, so much better. Dealing with trauma and not having to think, is God punishing me, or do I need to fast? And like all those mental mind games, I don't have to play those games anymore. So I just tell people in that space that I know what it's like to look at this path and say, I don't know if I want to do this because it looks really scary. But you have this one life. Like, you just have, this is the one life that we know about. Yeah. Maybe something happens, whatever, but this is the life that we know about. And why not live really the most intentional, deep, authentic life you can? And that's going to require a tough journey, and you're going to hit rock bottom, and all the parts of the hero's journey are going to have to happen. It's funny that religion so often wants to keep you away from the dark night of the soul, when religions are created in the dark night of the soul, right? Like, people find God in the dark night of the soul. Yeah. And so I just think there's no way to go through life and just say, I'm just going to take the path that's given to me. And that's just never going to be as meaningful to you or as worthy of a life worth living than the one that you intentionally create.
Some people believe that it finds you anyway, that even if you did do that, something would come up to ground you or show you.
I mean, that's the story of Jonah. Yeah, that's the story of Jonah, which, we don't even, scholars would say is not a real person. Anyway, but the story of that is really interesting. See, I still love working with the stories of the Bible. They're deeply archetypal stories, which is why they kept being told over and over around campfires, because there's still something interesting in them, even if they're not historically true and they were never meant to be. But yeah, Jonah is a great story that I use for doing this deep inner work, because he's running from himself, and then he's on the ship, and it's almost this, mystics always read every story. This is a great way to approach scripture. Mystics read every scriptural story as if they are all the characters. So it's never like, I'm here and I'm this guy and you're the Pharisees. Like, mystics never do that. Mystics say, I am the prodigal son, and I'm the elder son, and I'm the father, and I'm all of this, and how can I make space for all of this? So for Jonah, it's like when he's on the ship, they're trying to figure out, like, why is this suck so much? And it's like finally having this moment of deep honesty, like, it's me, like, I'm doing this, I haven't. And then he descends, and it's this beautiful descent, and it feels like you're gonna die, but then there's this kind of womb that holds you, and then he's able to go and kind of finish the mission that called for him. So I still read scripture. I still will dive into some of these places, but just never as a literal space, which is how mystics do story in scripture. It's always, this is just a story for inner work. This is where we go to play. It's never capital T true. And I find that that's a distinction that helps me get all the good wisdom gems out of scripture without having to, I don't know, be a Christian douche.
It's just so funny thinking about like somebody who's been studying real hard and having epiphanies and telling the truth as far as they know it, being surrounded by like rigid religious zealots that are like, get them, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's just a funny thing that can happen, right? And when I was starting to change, me and my wife were doing Bible studies, and I was like going to church, like confronting the pastor with like, what's up with this, and the shift that people take to sort of like alienating you and quiet down, and it's just interesting.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were talking about with fears, is that people don't go to church for truth, and people don't go to church to be corrected either. People go to church because it's a security blanket. And it's when we look at this psychologically and sociologically, especially in Christian churches, there's kind of this call and response where a pastor will kind of ask a question, and we all know the answer that we're supposed to say, and we kind of give the answer. And it's this, and there's always like, we're the good guys, and these are the bad guys, and this is how the world works. And so when you go, we're not going for truth. We're going because when I go to church, I get the sense that I understand how the world is working, and I get this kind of ritual of call and response, and I feel like I'm on top of it. I feel like I have what's going on. I feel like I'm on the right side of things. I feel good. And so when you go in to your Sunday school and say, well, like, what about this genocide? Like, I'm having a hard time with this. It's like, no. You're messing. You're pulling on my security blanket. And so what egos will do, and I got a lot more compassionate when I really studied, ego and shadow, is it's the ego's job to protect kind of your mental structures that are keeping you functioning. And so as soon as someone starts tugging on your security blanket, which has your identity and your meaning and your purpose and your community and everything, like it has everything, your foundation of life, the ego has to stand up and fight you and call you a sinner and do what it does.
Resort to cheap social tactics like this guy's saying this, and scoffing and stuff like that. And you're like, I thought that you were like above that sort of stuff. Where's all the compassion? Where's all the empathy gone? And it almost turns into like, this guy's flipping tables and acting like Jesus. Let's crucify him. Like,
when you look deep down,
how does that make sense?
I know, when you look deep down into it, though, they really don't know how and why they're having that reaction, because really it's their ego that's going out to play defense because they can sense there's something about this guy that is unsettling to me mentally, and your subconscious knows there's something about this guy that could really cause a problem for what's going on here in my brain. And so it will start attacking like that, and they really won't understand why, especially if they've never done deep inner work or contemplation where they know that they have an ego, or they know that they are not their thoughts. Like, if you haven't even done that work, it's just reactionary, and in some ways they can't even help it. And so a lot of that has to do with how egos show up. So when you're in these conversations, the hardest part is that the person who is still in the religion, their ego is defensive because they're sensing there's something dangerous here. But the person who's going through the deconstruction, their ego wants to be validated. Like, hey, I'm doing something really hard over here, and I think it's brave, and I think it's good, and I'm trying to do the right thing, and I'm being totally, for lack of a better word, crucified out here. And I need some empathy and compassion. And that person's ego is dying for validation. They're fighting every moment to be validated because they just want validation that they're not broken, right? That these pains, that they're just not fundamentally broken. And so when you have a conversation where one ego is playing defense and one ego is dying for validation, that's going to be a blow-up conversation. Brutal. It's brutal for everyone, though. It's brutal for both sides. It's painful for both sides. And so learning how to communicate around each other's ego is the only way that you can kind of get that human to human connection when you're in these places where your egos are fighting.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Well, Brittany, thank you so much for coming on here and telling us all this stuff and telling us about your channel. I was wondering, as kind of maybe just a last thing, maybe you could tell our audience where they can find you, what you got going on, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so my tag is no nonsense spirituality on most of social media. And my website is no nonsensespirituality.com. I do have courses on there. So I have like a spiritual reconstruction course, or I have a nihilism course where I go over all the tools that I use with my clients. Some people kind of want to do that personally before they kind of can trust to do that in conversation. And I have just lots of courses on there that you can check out. I do coaching, but I can never have enough scheduled hours to make everybody happy. So if my coaching hours are full, then I encourage you to check out some of my courses. If not, you can try to get a coaching slot too and have one-on-one conversations. And then I do podcast at the Almost Awakened podcast, and I do it with another ex-Mormon, and we're talking to people like Nick Jenkel, who's the author of The Spiritual Atheist, and I talked to the Humanize Me guy, what's his name, Bart Campolo, who does the Humanize Me podcast. Just anyone that I can. I'm talking.
You got the Naked Pastor coming up, right?
On Tuesday, I have the Naked Pastor coming on to talk to us about his cartoon. So I'm like you guys, I just enjoy the conversation, and anyone in this space who's trying to make sense of science and spirituality, any intersection of that are the people that I bring onto the show and the conversations that we have. And so you can check out that podcast for just a lot of free content, and then coaching and courses. And someday I'll write a book, but I'm working on it, but it's not quite there yet. And and
we
then,
look forward to that.
I do TikTok the most now. I just found it a couple months ago.
You're killing it. You're crushing it on TikTok.
I didn't even know. I literally, until like 3 months ago, I thought it was teenagers dancing. Like, I just thought it's a very educational app. I quite enjoy it. Now I can't go back to the other one. So I do try to hang out on TikTok when I can.
Yeah, you should do some lives on TikTok. That'd be interesting. I'd like to see that.
Ooh, yeah. Go live and interact with people in real time. That's kind of dangerous, though.
Yeah. Well, I think you do good.
Yeah, I don't know. I like to screen. I don't know. I do like to sometimes screen people that I talk to, because I just want to make sure it's a productive conversation. And so if someone... Yeah. I get a lot of people who want to talk to me, and I just know that they're just going to quote a scripture at me that I'm going to understand that scripture more than they do, and it's just going to be such a hard conversation if you can't give me anything there. And so I don't know. I'll have to think about that. But yeah, I have been hanging out on TikTok lately, and I don't know how to make short TikToks. My TikToks are like 5 minutes long, and I will not stop, and I will never stop.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
Maybe that's like maybe that's the history teacher in me, but these short 45-second ones, I wish I could do more. But I am just a long-winded person, and my voice is very verbose. So it's gonna be a couple minutes long.
Yeah, there's definitely an audience there for it, man, because they're watching them. That's how I found you. So yeah, it's definitely working. But anyway. Thank you so much again. It's great.
Awesome.
Such a good conversation. Thanks, guys, and big support to what you guys do and the conversations that you're having on your end.